Years earlier, Peter's passion for construction began during his high school years, working alongside his father in the family-owned business. Every summer, he learned the value of hard labor, developing skills that would later shape his career. His bond with his parents was strengthened through shared projects, often marked by late-night planning sessions over blueprints spread across their kitchen table. Polly, on the other hand, grew up in a bustling suburban neighborhood, where her love for adventure was fueled by childhood trips to national parks with her family. Her close-knit friendship with Emma and Shelley began during these outings, solidifying a trio of confidants who would eventually share countless escapades. Tragedy struck Peter's family when a car accident claimed his parents' lives, leaving him grappling with grief and the overwhelming responsibility of wrapping up the family business. The sale of their assets provided little financial relief, leaving Peter with just a plot of land and a shed that became a refuge in his times of despair. Polly, meanwhile, thrived in college, embracing the independence it offered. Her adventurous spirit blossomed further as she and her friends meticulously planned their dream summer road trip, piecing together an itinerary that promised excitement and freedom. Their lives crossed paths during Peter's first semester at community college, where their connection was instant but marked by differences. Peter's practicality contrasted with Polly's spontaneous nature, yet they found common ground in their shared determination to pursue personal goals. Despite their contrasting personalities, their relationship deepened, with Peter appreciating Polly's zest for life while she admired his steady, reliable character. Yet, as their engagement progressed, their differences sometimes led to misunderstandings, foreshadowing challenges ahead. Peter was taken aback as Polly, his fiancée, finished her thought. A surge of anger bubbled inside him. While driving to the show for their usual date, he had casually suggested a week-long camping trip after her college classes wrapped up next month. "Polly," he said, his tone tinged with disbelief, "you know I'm heading out the day after your semester ends. Shelley, Emma, and I are practically packed for our summer trip out west. This has been in the works for ages." Peter's frustration boiled over. "Polly, I can't believe you're still planning on going. When we got engaged, I thought we had an understanding. You wouldn't go. What changed?" Polly crossed her arms. "Peter, I never agreed to that. You know this trip has been planned since we started college. We've scrimped and saved for it, even fudged expenses to get extra cash from our parents. How could you expect me to give up something we've worked so hard for?" Peter's temper flared. "I know how your friends behave on trips like this. They mooch off others, and it's not always in ways I'd call respectable. I don't want you spending the entire summer with them, let alone 24/7s. Polly shot back, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare insult my friends. They're my closest friends, and I won't tolerate you talking about them like that. You've known about this trip since we started dating. How is it any different from the time you spend on your reserve duties?" Peter's jaw tightened. "The difference is that my trips are for work, serious, professional. I'm not partying or messing around. But if you go on this trip, we're done. Even if you don't plan to cheat, I know how things go. You'll drink too much, slip up, or let them talk you into something. Is this trip worth losing me? Are you trying to end this?" Polly's tone softened as she responded. "No, Peter. You're my guy, now and always. I'll come back to you and we'll be together forever." Peter's expression hardened. "If you go, you won't be my fiancé anymore. I won't tolerate it. Make your choice." The rest of the evening blurred for Peter. They sat through the movie as planned, but he barely paid attention. His thoughts were consumed by Polly, her trip, and past conversations that now seemed selfish and dismissive. Afterward, Peter skipped their usual routine of grabbing a snack. He drove Polly straight home, walked her to the door, and turned to leave. She reached for his arm. "Peter, what's going on? You're not staying? We didn't even stop for food. Aren't you coming inside? I was looking forward to tonight." Peter shook his head. "No, Polly, I'm not coming in. I'm not sure if I ever will again. You need to decide what you really want. But if you take that trip, you'll never see me in your house or your bed again." He turned and walked away, ignoring Polly's attempts to stop him. She trailed him, yelling, "Peter, you didn't even kiss me goodnight. Why are you acting like this?" As he reached his truck, she shouted, "Fine, Peter, be mad all you want. I'm going on the trip and that's final. When I get back, we'll set a wedding date. Get over it." She slammed her front door as he drove away in his old Ranger. Inside, Polly's friends, Emma and Shelley, were waiting, grinning. Emma smirked. "Didn't go over well, did it?" Polly shrugged. "He'll get over it. He always does when I stand my ground. He knows he can't do better than me. With a sly grin, she added, but if I ever catch him cheating, he'll regret it. Shelley raised an eyebrow. That's a little hypocritical, don't you think? Shut up, Polly snapped. I don't share my man. Emma burst out laughing. Oh, come on. You were fine sharing Jared with me last week. That was different, Polly said dismissively. Peter's my fiancé, not just some hookup. I don't care about anyone else. Now, are we stopping first in Butte or Bozeman? I feel like meeting a cowboy before we deal with more city guys. Peter didn't call or visit Polly after that night. The day after her trip began, he drove to her apartment to confirm she'd left. It was empty. To be certain, he drove 100 miles to her parents' house. The gas wasn't cheap, but he needed closure. While there, Peter returned Polly's belongings. Her father, visibly frustrated with her as well, helped him unload the boxes into her room. After a quick handshake, Peter returned to his now empty apartment. 2 years older than Polly, Peter had just earned an associate's degree in construction management and was working toward a bachelor's in project management. He aspired to start his own construction firm someday. As a staff sergeant in the National Guard, he balanced part-time jobs, reserve pay, and the GI Bill to stay debt-free. His life, though modest, was self-sufficient. When his parents died in a car accident, their construction business went under. The proceeds from selling their assets paid off debts, leaving Peter with nothing but an 80-acre plot of land with a shed and a stream. Occasionally, he'd camp there, either in the shed or by the water, finding solace in the simplicity of the place. After returning from Polly's childhood home, Pete made a firm decision. He was done with his apartment. Packing his things, he moved to the piece of land he had inherited, setting up camp in the old shed. While attending reserve meetings and summer training, he initially spent his days fishing, swimming, drinking, and drowning in self-pity. But after a week of sulking, he snapped out of it and threw himself back into his exercise routine, determined to maintain his fitness for his responsibilities as a staff sergeant. 3 weeks of idleness left Pete restless. One afternoon, he wandered into the machine shed and eyed the equipment. The old tractor was still functional. He used it occasionally to clear brush, and the season was just early enough to squeeze in a late crop of soybeans. Although he'd need to hire someone to handle the harvest, the work would keep him occupied and potentially earn him a little extra money. With a plan forming, Pete hitched the plow to the tractor and started tilling the field. After a few rows, his neighbor, Mr. Jeffers, stopped by to see what he was up to. Pete cut the engine and walked over to greet him. "What's the project, Pete?" Jeffers asked, leaning on his truck. "Thought I'd plant some soybeans," Pete replied. "I figured I've still got time to get a crop in." "You do, with short-season beans," Jeffers said with a nod. "But why bother plowing? Most folks use no-till these days. It saves time, cuts costs, and is better for the soil. Less erosion, more moisture retention. If you're just planting a small field, you can borrow my no-till drill. Just don't wreck it." Pete scratched his head. "I've never tried no-till before," Jeffers grinned. "It's simple. Mow the grass, spray with Roundup, and plant Roundup-ready beans with the drill. Once the beans sprout, you spray again, and you're set. The same method works for corn or wheat if you decide to rotate crops next year." Pete mulled it over that evening. No-till planting sounded efficient, less fuel, less labor. The next morning, he got to work, clearing the field with a bush hog. Over 4 days, he mowed, cleaned up debris, and smoothed the soil with his disc. Ready to plant, he drove to Jeffers' place to borrow the no-till drill. When Pete arrived, he found Jeffers tinkering with a piece of equipment. Extending a hand, Pete said, "Morning, Mr. Jeffers. Is the drill still available? I'd like to give no-till a shot and see how it compares to traditional planting." Jeffers shook his hand firmly and chuckled. "Call me Stan. You're a grown man now. And we're neighbors. Friends, I hope. I hear you're a sergeant in the reserves. Should I call you Sergeant?" Pete laughed. "Not a chance. Out here, just call me Pete." "Deal," Stan said. "Let's hook up the drill and get you going. I'll stick around to make sure you know how to use it." In 2 days, Pete had planted his soybeans. After cleaning and returning the drill, he turned his attention to fertilizing. He collected soil samples and sent them to the county extension office for testing. Luckily, the field didn't need lime, and the fertilizer requirements were minimal. Pete purchased what he needed from the co-op and used their spreader to apply it, preparing the ground for his crop to grow. 2 weeks of hard work left Pete feeling accomplished. Sitting outside the cave he now called home, he relaxed, listening to the soothing rush of the nearby stream and the distant hum of farm machinery. Yet, as he enjoyed the peaceful evening, his thoughts drifted back to Polly. What was she doing on her trip? Were his suspicions about her justified? The uncertainty gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the doubts that had festered for months. Memories of Polly flirting and dancing with other men surfaced, times when her actions seemed too casual, too familiar. During deployments, friends had mentioned seeing her out with other men, looking and acting like she was on dates. One even sent him a blurry photo. Polly had denied everything, offering explanations that Pete reluctantly accepted, though the seeds of mistrust remained. With a six-pack of beer by his side, Pete confronted the truth. He didn't trust Polly anymore. In fact, he wasn't even sure he loved her. Her decision to prioritize the trip and her dismissive attitude hurt, but not as deeply as he thought it should have if his feelings were genuine. He doubted she truly loved or respected him, based on her words and actions. Determined to move on, Pete resolved not to reach out when she returned. He wouldn't revisit their old hangouts or make himself available. Polly had only been to his farm once, and he doubted she'd find him if she tried. If she did, she'd have to prove she was worth his time and effort. As the summer progressed, Pete kept busy. When not attending reserve duties, he focused on his land. He converted part of the garage into a workshop for machinery repairs and planted a small garden for fresh produce. For now, he slept in the cool, comfortable cave, but knew he'd need something more suitable for winter. While renting an apartment if he returned to college was an option, the thought of leaving his land didn't appeal to him. He decided to find a way to stay through the colder months. The cave offered a scenic view, and Pete envisioned turning it into a winter retreat. Using old concrete blocks and stones, he planned to construct a sturdy wall across the entrance. He had already run electrical lines to the cave years ago, so utilities wouldn't be an issue. Measuring about 30 by 15 feet, the space was manageable, and leveling the floor with concrete would make it more comfortable. With a clear plan in mind, Pete got to work, ready to embrace his new life. At sunrise, Pete headed into town to gather supplies for his new project. He placed orders for sand, gravel, and cement to mix concrete and mortar, along with a steel door, triple-pane windows, lumber, and roofing materials for a porch. By noon, he was ready to dive into transforming the old bluff into a home. Though he chuckled at the thought of calling it a cave, it was really more of a rocky overhang than anything else. Pete's plan was straightforward. Enclose the front and back with sturdy walls, leaving a steel door for storage access. The materials were delivered the following day, and he wasted no time getting started. Using a drill, he set rebar into the rock, leveled the uneven ground, and poured concrete for both the walls and the porch. Once the initial layers dried, he filled the porch base with gravel before adding the final concrete slab. With the help of his trusty tractor, the work took just over a week. One afternoon, as Pete was smoothing the porch floor, he noticed someone cutting hay in a nearby field with surprising speed. When the tractor rolled to a stop near the stream, he was surprised to see a woman step down and splash into the water to cool off. Curious, Pete watched for a moment before returning to his work. Not long after, she approached him. "Hi there, I'm Fiona Morgan," she said with a friendly smile. "What are you doing with the old bluff?" Pete returned her smile. "I'm turning it into my home. Just wrapping up the porch, no offense, but I need to keep at it before the concrete sets wrong." "Fair enough," Fiona said with a grin. "I used to play here when I was a kid. Mind if I take a look around?" "Feel free," Pete replied. "I'll join you at the creek later, fully dressed this time since you're here." Fiona laughed. "Glad to hear it. Otherwise, I might have to put my Army combat training to use." Intrigued, Pete asked, "Army, huh? What'd you do?" "Retired staff sergeant," she said. "I was a medic until I got injured on a mission. Now I'm helping out on my parents' farm and thinking about getting certified as an EMT." Pete nodded, sharing his own story. "I'm a staff sergeant in the reserves, done 2 deployments. This land belonged to my grandpa, and I inherited it after my parents passed in a car accident. Their debts ate up everything else. I've been fixing it up little by little. This place suits me, and I might just stay here for good." Fiona tilted her head. "So it's just you and the land? No plans to settle down?" Pete chuckled. "I was engaged, but my fiancée preferred partying over commitment. She's out west now, having the time of her life. Sure, I'd like to meet someone, but I'm not in any rush. If it happens, it happens." The two continued chatting until Fiona sighed, mentioning that chores were calling her back home. Before leaving, she asked, "Mind if I swing by the creek once in a while to cool off?" Pete grinned. "Not at all. Just make some noise when you come. I like to swim without much on." Fiona laughed. "I might sneak up on you then. Could be fun to catch you off guard." With a playful smile, she added, "See you later, Pete." A couple of days later, Fiona returned, raking hay into neat windrows. When she finished, she parked by the creek, stripped down to a swimsuit, and waded into the water. Pete, working on the front wall of his bluff home, watched her now and then. When his task was done, he grabbed a pool noodle and joined her in the stream. "Mind if I join?" he asked. "Not at all," she replied, flashing a smile. They chatted briefly before Pete excused himself to return to his project, inviting Fiona up for a beer when she was done. This soon became their routine. Fiona would finish her work, take a swim, and share a drink with Pete while catching up on his progress. Within a few weeks, Pete's new home had taken shape. He built a 2-level interior with a small kitchen, a cozy sitting area, a bathroom, and a wood stove for warmth. Remarkably, he managed to complete it for just $3,700. As hay season ended, Fiona's visits became less frequent, but she still stopped by the creek twice a week. Pete found himself looking forward to her visits, disappointed when she didn't show. One evening, floating lazily in the stream, he gathered the courage to ask her out. Fiona raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You're joking, right?" "Not at all," Pete replied, hiding his nerves. "But if you're not interested, that's fine. I just thought it'd be nice." Seeing his sincerity, Fiona softened. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just wasn't expecting that. You've always treated me like one of the guys. And, well, I'm not exactly the same person I was before. I've got scars, a limp, and I haven't been on a date since I got hurt." Pete smiled warmly. "None of that matters to me. I like you for who you are. If anyone doesn't see how amazing you are, they don't deserve a chance." Fiona's face brightened at his words. She wasn't in love with Pete yet, but for the first time in years, she felt like she could be. As winter approached, Pete and Fiona continued spending time together. She loved how snug and welcoming his bluff home was, and every visit brought them closer. One spring afternoon, they sat on the porch watching a thunderstorm roll in. As the winds picked up and the sky darkened, a deafening roar filled the air. The porch roof began to shake. Pete jumped to his feet, grabbing Fiona's arm. "Tornado!" he shouted. "We've got to get inside!" Pulling her to safety, Pete led Fiona to the back of the home into a small, reinforced storage room. They shut the door and huddled together on the floor. The storm's roar grew louder. Glass shattered somewhere in the house, and then everything went eerily quiet. Pete waited 10 minutes before cautiously opening the storage room door. He motioned for Fiona to follow him into the main living area. The storm's fury was evident. One of the front windows was shattered, and part of the porch roof had been blown inside. Rain and debris littered the floor, and his bed was damp, but not completely soaked. Outside, the porch roof was gone, torn away by the violent winds. Stepping into the drizzle, Pete surveyed the damage. His machine shed was reduced to rubble. Its roof collapsed onto the equipment inside. Around the property, once beautiful trees were split, twisted, or completely uprooted. Fiona came up beside him, slipping an arm around his waist and resting her head on his shoulder. "Oh, Pete, I'm so sorry," she murmured. "Let's check out the damage." Together, they headed toward what was left of the shed. As they rounded the bluff near Pete's home, they spotted their trucks. Both had sustained damage from flying debris. Fiona's windshield was cracked and starred, clearly struck by something heavy. While both vehicles seemed functional, her truck was no longer roadworthy with the broken windshield. At the shed, the scene was chaotic. Pete's larger machinery was crumpled under the collapsed roof, and smaller tools and equipment were scattered across the yard. It was clear he'd need to clear the wreckage before assessing what could be salvaged. The storm hadn't been the strongest tornado, but it was enough to wreak havoc. The shed wasn't entirely gone. Sections of metal siding and roofing remained intact, but most of the structure had folded under the storm's pressure. Curious to see the storm's full impact, Pete and Fiona climbed to the top of the bluff, overlooking the area. Fiona froze, her hand gripping Pete's arm. "Oh no, Pete," she gasped. "The storm hit our farm too. Look at the house and barns. They're a mess. I need to check on Mom and Dad." Without waiting, Fiona took off toward her truck, moving as fast as her injured leg would allow. Pete hurried after her, catching her arm. "Hold on, Fiona," he said firmly. "You can't drive with that windshield. Let's grab some tools and take my truck." Together, they rummaged through the debris in Pete's shed, gathering a chainsaw, fuel, ropes, chains, a come-along, and steel pry bars. With their gear loaded, Pete drove them toward Fiona's farm, navigating roads blocked by fallen trees. Twice, they had to stop to cut through the debris, delaying their progress. What should have been a short drive stretched into 45 tense minutes. When they arrived, Fiona's fears were confirmed. The house and outbuildings were in shambles, much like Pete's shed, mostly collapsed rather than swept away. Fiona ran frantically, calling for her parents, her voice rising with panic. Pete followed, scanning the wreckage. Finally, they heard faint shouting from beneath what was left of the house. Pete reversed his truck close to the sound, and they began clearing the debris. A large tree lay across one corner of the house, partially blocking a damaged cellar door. After cutting away the tree, Pete uncovered the cellar door, which was wedged against a staircase leading to the basement. Fiona wasted no time rushing down, shouting for her parents. Pete followed with a flashlight, and at the bottom of the stairs, Fiona embraced her parents tightly. Pete stood nearby, offering silent support as the family reunited. When Fiona's father, Seth, emerged from the basement, he stopped in shock, surveying the destruction. Fiona and her mother flanked him, holding him close as they processed the scene. Pete joined them, his voice calm but resolute. "Folks, it's getting dark and the rain's picking up again. Why don't you come back to my place for the night? We can regroup in the morning and figure out our next steps. My place isn't fancy, but it's dry, warm, and secure. I'll patch the broken window and get a fire going." They agreed, and that evening the four of them found shelter at Pete's home. Fiona and her mother prepared a simple meal on the wood stove while everyone discussed how to move forward. Pete insisted they stay with him until they had a better plan. The next day, they divided tasks. Seth and Fiona returned to their farm to salvage what they could, while Pete went to town to gather supplies. He purchased a replacement window and materials to rebuild his porch roof, filing an insurance claim for his losses. The adjuster promised to visit Pete's property and Fiona's farm within a day or two. For now, Pete was allowed to replace the broken window to prevent further damage, but was advised to hold off on major repairs. Back home, Pete spent the morning installing the new window. Afterward, he cleared debris from the machine shed until he freed his tractor, which had minor damage to its sheet metal but was otherwise operational. He was grateful he'd taken out an insurance policy that covered his equipment as well as his home and shed. By evening, Fiona and her father returned to Pete's place with essentials: a mattress, bedding, clothing, and preserved food. They'd also salvaged a generator to keep their deep freeze running. Pete brought out his own generator to power his appliances until electricity was restored, which, according to news reports, could take another day or two. As they settled in for the night, Pete looked around at the makeshift household. Despite the chaos, he felt a sense of resilience and determination. Together, they would weather this storm and rebuild what had been lost. The following 10 days were a whirlwind for Pete. The insurance adjuster arrived promptly, and Pete was awarded $100,000 to rebuild his machine shed and 2 smaller outbuildings. He also received $15,000 to compensate for the damage to his machinery and $7,500 for repairs to his modest home. Since much of the settlement included labor costs, Pete knew he could save a significant portion by doing most of the work himself. With this financial boost, Pete decided to expand his home. He planned to incorporate the existing 12 by 30-foot porch into the main structure and build a new wraparound porch on 3 sides of the house. Although the $7,500 for the home repairs wouldn't cover everything, Pete figured the additional cost would be minimal if he handled the work himself. His vision was to use the cave area as a bedroom while dedicating the new addition to a living space, kitchen, and office. He also planned to construct a larger bathroom, accessible from both the bedroom and the addition. Eager to begin, Pete spent 2 days digging footings for the new porch. Using salvaged materials from the storm-damaged buildings, he built the formwork and had the concrete poured before receiving his insurance payout. Once the funds arrived, Pete was ready to begin construction in earnest. He explained his plans to Fiona and her family, who fully supported his vision. Pete decided to use concrete for the new walls, planning to veneer them with stone. Though it required a larger investment up front, he believed it was worth it. Concrete would provide better insulation and protection from future storms. By purchasing ready mixed concrete and handling the labor himself, Pete estimated he could complete the walls for around $2,500. With his military experience working with concrete, he felt confident in managing the project despite needing to rent some equipment. Within days, the concrete walls were poured and curing. Pete was preparing to remove the forms and begin roofing the addition when his plans took an unexpected turn. His reserve unit called with orders. Pete was being deployed to Afghanistan for a year. While the additional income was welcome, he hated leaving the farm in its unfinished state. That evening, Pete broke the news to Fiona and her parents. Fiona's immediate response was a sharp, "Oh, crap," followed by a tight hug. Pete reassured them that they were welcome to stay in his home as long as needed while rebuilding their own. Their new house, a steel structure on a concrete pad, was still in the early stages as they waited for the construction company to begin work. In the meantime, they kept busy with farm tasks and repairing their outbuildings. The night before Pete's departure, something unexpected happened. He woke to find Fiona slipping into his bed. Before he could say a word, she kissed him passionately and pulled him close. Pete hesitated, whispering, "Fiona, we can't do this. Your parents are right here. They'll hear us." Fiona wasn't deterred. "I don't care," she murmured, her voice firm. "Mom knows we're together, and I'm sure Dad does too. I want this night with you before you leave, and I'm not taking no for an answer." Ignoring Pete's protests, she straddled him, her determination overriding his reservations. Despite their attempts to stay quiet, Fiona's pleasure was loud enough that her parents likely heard. Afterward, they fell asleep entwined, waking only when Bridget began preparing breakfast. When Pete groggily emerged from the bedroom, Bridget greeted him with a knowing grin. She set 3 cups of coffee on the small table and chuckled at Pete's sheepish expression. Sensing his discomfort, she said kindly, "Pete, I was wondering when you two would finally share a bed. It's clear how much you care for each other. Seth and I have no issue with it. Fiona is a grown woman, and if she chooses to spend her nights with a man we deeply respect, it's her decision." Pete managed a grateful smile, feeling both relieved and slightly embarrassed. Bridget's understanding made the situation easier, and as he sat down with his coffee, he silently resolved to make the most of his time before leaving. The day Pete had to report for deployment finally arrived. Fiona and her parents stood together, watching as he drove off to join his unit. As before, Fiona planned to retrieve his truck after his departure and return it to his farm. Pete had added her name to his checking account so she could handle his bills while he was overseas, and she and her father agreed to tend to his small acreage during his year-long absence. The first 3 days at the reserve center were consumed by the usual grind of mobilization: mountains of paperwork, equipment inspections, and last-minute shipments. Larger machinery they'd need was already stationed in the operational theater, with smaller tools sent ahead prior to departure. To Pete's surprise, Fiona and her parents showed up at the bus station to see him off. As soldiers boarded, Pete turned back to wave, catching Fiona's teary-eyed smile. After arriving at the mobilization station, Pete and his unit underwent medical and dental evaluations, personnel updates, legal briefings, and intensive training, including weapons qualification. During a legal session, Pete quietly updated his will, leaving everything he owned to Fiona. He chose not to tell her about the decision. After 3 weeks of preparation, Pete's combat engineer unit boarded aircraft bound for Kazakhstan. There, they spent a short acclimatization period before heading to their deployment site, where they replaced another engineer unit. Over the next month, the handover was completed, and Pete's team assumed full responsibility for engineering operations in the area, supporting Allied and U.S. forces. The local summer was in full swing when Pete's unit arrived, with temperatures often soaring past 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The dry, dusty environment was grueling, but the work never slowed. Days bled into nights as the unit cleared routes, constructed schools and roads, and fortified bases. They faced shot fire, verbal maltreatment from hostile locals, and relentless workloads. Pete both loved and loathed the intensity. Despite the chaos, Pete often called home to talk to Fiona. Their conversations grew increasingly personal, and the word love began to surface. Pete found himself thinking about her more and more, questioning whether his feelings were romantic, platonic, or simply physical. Whatever the answer, his connection with Fiona felt deeper and more genuine than anything he'd experienced with Polly. 3 quarters into the deployment, disaster struck. While working on a mountain road, Pete's unit came under attack by insurgents. The firefight raged for nearly half an hour before the platoon sergeant was wounded. As the next senior NCO, Pete quickly stepped into the leadership role, organizing the platoon and assessing their situation. When the platoon leader was also hit, Pete found himself fully in charge, leading the remaining soldiers through the firefight. Spotting a lull in enemy fire along one sector, Pete initiated a counterattack. Rallying 13 soldiers, he led a charge to break through the insurgent line. As they advanced, requested air support arrived, with attack helicopters raining fire on enemy positions. Within minutes, the insurgents were in retreat. Reinforcements arrived shortly after, helping secure the area, evacuate the wounded, and mop up. Pete's leadership during the attack earned him respect and recognition. He remained in the role of platoon sergeant for the remainder of the deployment, proving himself both capable and charismatic under pressure. By the time the unit returned to the U.S., Pete had been promoted to E7 and awarded the Bronze Star for his actions. The long-awaited day of return finally arrived. Pete's unit was replaced, and they flew home to a hero's welcome. As the plane landed, families and friends gathered to greet the soldiers. Pete barely had time to scan the crowd before Fiona launched herself at him, wrapping her arms and legs around him in an enthusiastic embrace. "Pete, I missed you so much," she exclaimed, kissing him. "I'm so glad you're back. I've got your truck. What do you want to do first? It's almost lunchtime." Pete laughed, squeezing her tightly. "I want good food. We may do, but I've been dreaming of real pizza and steak. Let's start at the House of Pizza. I loved that place in college. After that, I just want to go home, sleep for a day, and eat some more." At the restaurant, they took Pete's favorite table. Holding hands, they chatted until a waitress approached. Pete froze when he recognized her. Polly. Visibly pregnant, she gasped upon seeing him. "Pete, oh my God, it's you!" she blurted, dropping her notepad. "Where have you been? I've missed you so much." She leaned in, arms wide for a hug, but Pete instinctively stepped back. His voice was calm but cold. "Hi, Polly, I see you've moved on. Or is that from partying with those friends of yours?" Polly's face crumpled, and she fled into the kitchen, leaving Pete and Fiona stunned. A different waitress appeared shortly after, her attitude curt. Pete hesitated, uneasy about the situation. Turning to Fiona, he said, "Maybe we should go. I've lost my appetite after that." Fiona nodded without argument. Rising, she leaned in to kiss him softly. "I'll meet you outside in a minute. I need to use the restroom first." The waitress threw a cold glare at Fiona before stomping back into the kitchen. Pete waited by the door, but loud voices soon erupted from the hallway leading to the restrooms. Alarmed, he stepped closer and saw Fiona and Polly face to face, both visibly upset. Before Pete could intervene, he heard Polly's venomous sneer. "I don't know what you think you're doing with my fiancé, you pathetic little cripple. I know his unit was deployed, but now that he's back, he's mine. So step aside, sweetheart." Fiona laughed coldly. "Your fiancé? Honey, Pete wouldn't take you back if you were the last woman on Earth. You threw away your chance when you ditched him to run off with your trashy friends. You really thought he'd forgive you after that?" Her eyes dropped to Polly's pregnant belly. "What's this? Trying to trap him into playing daddy for your kid? Or is this just one of your souvenirs from your adventures? Face it, you're done here. Now get back to the kitchen and earn your paycheck, or better yet, go find another sucker to fool. Pete's mine." Fiona's voice turned steely. "And just so we're clear, I'm a retired Army sergeant. I've dealt with worse than you. Don't make me regret being polite." Without another glance, Fiona turned and walked toward Pete, her cheeks slightly flushed, but her demeanor calm. Sliding her arm through his, she smiled up at him. "Sorry about that, Pete. I hope I didn't overstep, but she had it coming. Let's get out of here. I've lost my appetite. Can we go home now?" On the drive back, Fiona grew uncharacteristically fidgety, glancing out the window and bouncing slightly in her seat. To Pete, she seemed equal parts excited and anxious. Just before they reached his property, he finally asked, "What's going on? You've been acting weird since we left town." Fiona hesitated. "Okay, don't be mad. But while you were gone, I might have spent more of your money than you expected. Dad and Mom thought it was a good idea, and, well, I kind of went all in. I hope you're not upset." Pete frowned, unsure of what she meant. As he pulled into the driveway, he stopped the truck abruptly. His house stood before him, fully finished. The roof was complete. A wraparound porch hugged 3 sides of the home, and the exterior was beautifully veneered with stone. Flower beds and shrubs adorned a newly landscaped yard. His machine shed had been rebuilt, slightly larger than before, and everything looked pristine. He sat in stunned silence, staring at the transformation, his stomach twisted as he considered the cost. "Fiona," he said finally, his voice tight, "it looks like you spent all of my insurance money, and maybe even some of my Army pay. You knew I planned to do the work myself to save on labor. I didn't want to blow through everything." Before he could continue, Fiona interrupted. "Pete, no! I didn't spend all your money. We did exactly what you said you wanted for the house and shed, but we didn't pay for any labor. My parents and I did all the work ourselves, with help from neighbors and friends. Everyone pitched in to support our local hero. Please, just come see for yourself before you get upset." She grabbed his hand and led him out of the truck, practically pulling him toward the house. At the front door, she gestured for him to enter the addition built on the old porch's foundation. Crossing to his desk, she handed him a bank book and turned on the computer. Once it booted up, she opened his financial software and showed him a detailed breakdown of every expense. Pete's jaw dropped as he scrolled through the numbers. His accounts were still in excellent shape. Fiona had only spent about half of what he'd estimated for the materials alone. "How did you manage this?" he asked, incredulous. "You spent less than I thought possible for all of this." Fiona beamed. "Well, I made a few deals. When we explained you were deployed in Afghanistan and rebuilding after the tornado, a lot of suppliers gave us steep discounts. Some even donated materials. We told them the labor was being done by volunteers to honor your service. They really went above and beyond for you." Taking his hand, she added, "Come on, I want to show you the machine shed and shop. You'll love it. And after that, we're heading to Mom and Dad's for supper. They've been waiting to see you." Pete followed Fiona as she guided him through the yard and machine shed, still trying to process everything he was seeing. The space was exactly as he'd envisioned in his plans, perhaps even better. Compressed air lines had been installed at key points throughout the shed, and a maintenance pit had been built into the floor, complete with a sturdy cover for safety when not in use. As they stepped outside, Fiona pointed out where the tornado-damaged trees had been cleared, replaced by a new shed tucked behind the house to store firewood safely out of the weather. Pete's disbelief deepened as she explained the work that had gone into restoring and improving the property. Back inside the house, Fiona led Pete to the bedroom carved from the old cave. She closed the door softly behind them, her expression shifting as she stepped closer. Wrapping her arms around his neck, she pulled him into a kiss that started tenderly but quickly grew more fervent. Her hands roamed as she pressed herself against him, her soft moan igniting something deep within him. Pete responded in kind, their clothes discarded in a trail leading to the bed. The passion between them was raw and consuming as they came together. Pete lost himself in the moment, the weight of his emotions finally releasing. When it was over, he kissed Fiona gently before pulling her close, her head resting against his shoulder and her leg draped over him. "I missed you more than I can say," Fiona whispered. "I love you, Pete. I worried about you every single day you were gone." Pete tilted his head to kiss her forehead. "I love you too, Fiona. After everything I've felt with you, I realize I never truly loved Polly. I didn't even understand what love was until you. Whether we're working, sitting together, or making love, it's all better with you. Everything is better because of you." After a brief nap, Pete carefully slipped out of bed so as not to wake Fiona. He wandered to the kitchen and grabbed a cold Dos Equis from the fridge. Stepping onto the porch, he sank into one of the new chairs and stared out across the stream, taking in the familiar sights and sounds of home. The low calls of cattle mingled with the distant bark of a dog and the faint hum of a neighbor's tractor. The gentle trickle of the stream beside the house completed the serene backdrop. Pete was so relaxed that he didn't notice Fiona had joined him until she stepped onto the porch. She was as bare as he was, her eyes glowing and a soft smile lighting up her face. Pete couldn't look away from her. "You're stunning," Pete murmured, his voice full of quiet reverence. "I love you so much." Fiona's eyes filled with tears. "No, I'm not," she said softly. "I have so many scars now, but I love you for saying that." Pete reached out and pulled her close. "You are beautiful, Fiona. Every scar is a mark of your strength and dedication. They don't detract from you. They add to you. You're perfect to me, and I wouldn't change a thing. Now, sit here with me for a bit. I just want to enjoy this piece until I finish my beer. Then we'll head over to your parents' place." On the drive to Fiona's family farm, Pete took in the surrounding area, reconnecting with the land he'd missed. The tornado's aftermath was still visible. Downed trees lay in tangled piles, some rotting, while others had been trimmed back to encourage new growth. The destruction hurt to see, a painful reminder of nature's raw power. Arriving at the Morgans' property, Pete noticed the progress they had made. Though signs of the storm lingered, the barns and house had been rebuilt, and the remaining trees showed signs of recovery. Still, Pete felt a pang of sadness at the sight of the new house, a simple metal structure with a small porch, so different from the charming two-story home the tornado had destroyed. Seth greeted Pete with a firm handshake and a grin, while Bridget pulled him into a warm hug. "Welcome home, Sergeant," Seth said, his tone light. "We're all glad you're back safe. Maybe now these women of mine can stop worrying so much and actually get a decent night's sleep." After a hearty meal, the four of them sat outside as the evening settled in, chatting and laughing under the stars. As the clock neared 9 p.m., Pete found himself struggling to keep his eyes open. He finally stood, stretching with a yawn. "It's been wonderful catching up, but I'm beat," he admitted. "I need about a week of sleep to recover. Thank you for the amazing dinner and for making me feel so welcome." Pete stood to shake Seth's hand, a firm grip exchanged between the two men. Bridget stepped in for another warm hug, holding him tightly before pulling back with glistening eyes. "Don't be a stranger, Pete," she said, her voice soft but sincere. To Pete's surprise, she gave him a quick kiss on the cheek before stepping away with a smile. Pete returned the smile and began walking to his truck. Fiona hugged her parents goodbye and hurried after him, slipping her arm around his and leaning her head on his shoulder. When they reached the truck, Pete opened the door for her only to be surprised when she climbed in without hesitation. He blinked, puzzled. "Fiona, what are you doing?" Her expression was a mix of nerves and determination. "Pete, I'm coming with you," she said. "If you don't want me to, I'll understand, but I want to be with you. I told Mom and Dad already. This is what I want." Pete paused, gathering his thoughts carefully. "Fiona, you know I love you. I'd love nothing more than to take you home with me tonight. But are you sure this is what you want? We need to think this through about what people might say, how your parents or the neighbors will react. I want you with me, but I also want to make sure this feels right for you." Fiona's face softened as she smiled. "Pete, this feels right. I've known I loved you completely since before you left. I wanted to talk about this sooner, but I never found the time. Today, I told Polly that you're my man, and I meant it. I don't just want to spend the night with you. I want to spend my life with you. You make me feel whole, like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. I know I'm not perfect, but I'll try to be everything you want." Pete studied her for a long moment before climbing into the truck. As he started the engine, he glanced back toward the house. Seth and Bridget stood together, watching. Seth's arm was wrapped protectively around Bridget's shoulder, and they waved as Pete looked their way. Bridget leaned into Seth, resting her head on his chest as they stood silhouetted against the porch light. Pete nodded and turned onto the road, Fiona scooting closer to rest her head on his shoulder and placing her hand lightly on his thigh. When they arrived at Pete's home, they walked arm in arm to the front door. Fiona flipped on the light as Pete headed to the couch where his duffel bag still sat from earlier. Digging through its contents, he tossed items onto the floor until he found what he was looking for, his right combat boot. Turning it upside down, he shook it until a small box fell into his hand. Holding the box tightly, he walked over to Fiona, whose expression was a mix of curiosity and surprise. Pete opened the box, revealing a ring. Fiona gasped, her eyes widening. "Fiona," Pete began, "I've told you before that I love you. I was planning to do this soon, but since you're here with me now, it feels like the right time. If we're going to share this home, I think it's only fitting to make it official. Fiona, will you marry me?" Tears welled in Fiona's eyes as she nodded, trembling slightly as she extended her left hand. Pete slid the ring onto her finger with care, and once he let go, she threw her arms around him, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Pete Johnson, I'll marry you. I've wanted this for so long. From the moment we met, you treated me like an equal, like I mattered, scars and all. You've never made me feel like just a woman to pass the time with, but a true partner. I love you for who you are and how you see me." She pulled back slightly to meet his eyes. "Now," she said with a teasing smile, "let's clean up and get some rest. We have to go to Dad's tomorrow to show off this ring and grab more of my things." Pete blinked. "More of your things?" Fiona blushed. "I hope you don't mind, but I've already moved a lot of my clothes here. While you were gone, this place started feeling like home to me. I've been staying here a lot while looking after it, and honestly, it feels more like ours than just yours." Pete laughed, shaking his head. "Well, I guess that settles it." The two headed for the shower, where they enjoyed a quick but intimate rinse before stumbling toward the bed. Their passion reignited, and they made love with an intensity that left them both breathless. As they drifted off to sleep, Fiona curled against Pete, her arm and leg draped over him protectively. Pete fell asleep with a contented smile, feeling more at home than ever before. As the first light of dawn filtered into the room, Pete and Fiona stirred, still tangled together from the night before. Careful not to wake her, Pete slipped out of bed to use the bathroom. When he returned, the bed was empty. He wandered into the kitchen, where he found Fiona brewing coffee, her hair loose and her expression serene. She looked up with a warm smile. "Why don't you sit out on the porch and enjoy the morning while I finish this? I'll bring you a cup in a minute." Pete nodded, stepping outside into the crisp morning air. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden rays through the mist drifting over the stream. The gentle sounds of nature surrounded him, birds singing, livestock stirring, and the melodic babble of water. Pete exhaled deeply, feeling at peace for the first time in what felt like ages. Fiona soon joined him, carrying 2 steaming mugs. She handed him one and sat down, just as comfortably unclothed as he was. Pulling her chair closer to the edge of the porch, she gave him a playful look. "So," she teased, tilting her head, "you see anything you like, soldier?" Pete smirked. "Definitely. The view of the stream and your dad's hayfield is something I've really missed." Fiona gasped in mock outrage before breaking into a grin. "You idiot! Maybe I should go inside and put some clothes on. See how you like that." Pete chuckled, giving her a mock-serious look. "Oh, no need for that. Now that you mention it, there are some other things worth admiring. But, teasing a man who's been stuck in Afghanistan and without a woman for that long might be risky. It could backfire." Fiona leaned back, laughing. "I sure hope so. How about we finish this coffee, let things backfire, and then grab some breakfast before heading to my parents'? Deal?" Pete grinned, clinking his mug against hers. "Deal." After their playful reintroduction, the two took a brief nap before Fiona got up to make what Pete proudly dubbed a proper breakfast. The spread included biscuits, ham, eggs, hash browns, and freshly brewed coffee. Once they'd eaten, they dressed and headed to her parents' house, arriving just as Seth and Bridget were sitting down for lunch. Bridget jumped up to set 2 extra places, but Fiona waved her off. "Mama, don't bother. We just finished breakfast a little while ago. We're not hungry." Bridget raised an eyebrow, her tone teasing. "Fiona Morgan, what on earth were you doing that Pete had to wait until lunchtime for breakfast? I thought I taught you better than that." Seth snorted with laughter, earning a sharp glance from Bridget. Realization dawned a moment later, and her cheeks flushed a deep red. She turned back to her meal, muttering, "Oh." The room fell quiet for a moment before Bridget busied herself with her plate, avoiding Fiona's amused grin. Fiona poured 2 glasses of iced tea, handing one to Pete with a quick kiss. Then, sitting beside her mother, she casually extended her left hand across the table. Bridget's eyes widened as she noticed the engagement ring letting out an excited squeal as she grabbed Fiona's hand to examine it closely. After lunch, Fiona stayed to help her mother clear the table and wash the dishes while Pete and Seth sat outside, chatting. When they finally left, the truck was loaded with a collection of Fiona's belongings, which they took back to Pete's house. In the months that followed, Pete and Fiona seamlessly blended their lives. They worked the 80-acre farm Pete had inherited and helped out on Fiona's parents' property. Over the years, they assumed full responsibility for both farms, growing their family in the process. After the birth of their second child, the families decided to trade homes. Seth and Bridget moved into Pete's cozy cave home, while Pete and Fiona took over the larger main house. Seth and Bridget remained there until their passing. Pete retired from the Army Reserve after an impressive 40 years of service, achieving the rank of Command Sergeant Major. Their youngest son eventually took over managing the combined farms, allowing Pete and Fiona to spend their later years back in the cave home, where their life together had begun. It was a peaceful retreat, filled with memories of love and resilience. Throughout his life, Pete remained steadfast in keeping 3 promises. He had vowed never to return to Polly after she left him, a promise he upheld without question. He had pledged to love, honor, and cherish Fiona, a commitment he fulfilled every single day of their marriage. And he had promised Seth he would take care of Fiona, a promise that defined his life's greatest purpose and joy. As the golden hues of the setting sun painted the sky, Pete and Fiona sat quietly on the porch of their cave home, their hands intertwined. The stream below murmured a familiar melody, a song that had accompanied their journey from the very beginning. The land around them, once a canvas of hard labor and sacrifice, now thrived as a testament to the love and resilience that had defined their lives together. Pete leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping across the farm that had become their legacy. "I never imagined it would turn out like this," he murmured, his voice touched with awe. Fiona, her silver hair glowing in the evening light, smiled warmly. "Neither did I," she replied. "But every twist, every challenge, every moment brought us here, and I wouldn't change a single thing." The sound of laughter carried on the breeze from the main house. Their grandchildren were playing near the stream, likely learning to skip stones as Fiona had once taught their children. Pete could see William, their youngest, standing nearby, his presence a reminder of the continuity of life. The farm was now in his capable hands, thriving under his stewardship as he blended tradition with innovation. "Do you remember when we first started here?" Pete asked, his eyes distant with memory. "I thought this cave would barely hold us through one winter." Fiona chuckled softly. "And I told you it would last a lifetime. Like us," she said, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. "It wasn't easy, but we made it home, and we made it ours." The cave home, now more a retreat than a necessity, remained a cherished place. Its walls held stories of late-night conversations, shared meals, and quiet moments of reflection. It was where their life had truly begun, a place that had witnessed their triumphs and struggles, their laughter and tears. Pete looked at Fiona, his expression tender. "You've always been my anchor," he said quietly. "No matter what life threw at us, you kept us steady." Fiona met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "And you've been my compass, Pete. You've always shown me where home is, where it's always been." As twilight deepened, Pete thought of the promises he had made. He had vowed never to return to Polly after she left him, a promise he upheld without regret. He had pledged to love, honor, and cherish Fiona, a commitment he had lived every day, and he had promised her father to care for Fiona, a promise that had shaped his life's greatest purpose and joy. The years had weathered them both, but their bond had only grown stronger. Their family, their land, and their love were enduring legacies that would carry on long after they were gone. Pete glanced toward the main house, where the lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the yard. It was a symbol of the life they had built, vibrant and full of promise. Fiona rested her head on his shoulder, and together they watched the first stars appear in the sky. The laughter of their grandchildren and the gentle hum of the stream filled the air, a comforting reminder of the cycles of life. "We've had a good life," Pete said after a long pause. "Better than I ever dreamed." Fiona nodded, her voice soft but steady. "And it's not over yet. There's still so much more to enjoy, more to give, more to share." Pete smiled, kissing her hand gently. "As long as I have you, Fiona, every day is a blessing." And so they remained on the porch as night fell, the land around them alive with the memories of a life well lived. Together, they faced the future with the quiet confidence of two souls who had weathered every storm and come out stronger, knowing their love would continue to shine as a beacon for generations to come.